Hey, purple is yellow's complement.
When you think of the arcades, what names come to mind? A few common answers include Namco, Capcom, Midway, Atari, and others. But today, I'm focusing on SNK. Over 40 years old and still kicking, SNK is best known for series such as The King of Fighters, Metal Slug, and Samurai Showdown. Despite a tumultuous history, they're still held in high regard to this day. And while they made a good number of arcade games back in the 70s and 80s, their big rise to prominence began in 1990. Part of the reason for this rise? Raise your hand if you got nostalgia from seeing that classic startup. Yeah, the Neo Geo was SNK's trademark in the 90s and early 2000s, known for its easily recognizable red cabinet, its distinctive control setup, and that startup screen. This system was a staple in arcades for a long time. You wanna know how long? The Neo Geo originally released in April of 1990. SNK's last officially released game for the platform, Samurai Showdown 5 Special, was released in 2004. For reference, it outlasted the SNES and Genesis, the N64 and PS1, and lasted until about halfway through the lifespan of the GameCube, Xbox, and PS2. So, since this icon is celebrating its 30th anniversary this year, and considering I've already covered 2 entire franchises from the Neo Geo, I figured we'd take some time to look back at how it all began. And as with all great innovations, it all started with an idea. God, I sound cheesy. So let's start out with looking at the systems themselves. Yes, systems as in the plural. There were actually 2 implementations of the Neo Geo's hardware, the MVS and the AES. The MVS, short for Multi-Video System, was the coin-op cabinets that you'd see in arcades. But there was more to this than just a simple red cabinet. The reason for this basic-ass cabinet design was a real innovation for its time. As the name implies, the cabinet was designed to be capable of running different games from the same cabinet. This is because the games were on self-contained cartridges. Yeah, that was the standard for consoles, but this was an arcade machine. And for arcades at the time, it was typical for a game to have its own dedicated arcade board. So switching games meant that you had to unhook the board, swap in a new one, hook that one in, check the dip switch settings. It was a time-consuming process, assuming that it was even possible for the game you wanted. With the MVS, you can simply swap out a cartridge, switch out the art, and boom, you're good to go! This was a big deal, as since it came in 1, 2, 4, or even 6 slot models, you could save a lot of room, not to mention money. The hardware itself was an upgraded version of a motherboard that SNK and partner company Alpha Denshi, also known as ADK, had used in previous games. The base hardware was unique in that it used sprite strips instead of tile map-based backgrounds, and the upgraded Neo Geo version added sprite scaling and support for much higher amounts of data per game. This was one of the most powerful pieces of hardware at the time, if not the most when it was first released. On the other side of the coin, there was the Neo Geo AES, or Advanced Entertainment System. This was the console half of the equation. Using similar cartridges to the MVS, the AES was a simple console in structure, and came with a fight stick for a controller. How about that, a console known for a lot of fighting games having a fight stick for a basic controller? And since the motherboard was basically the same as the MVS, the quality was basically identical as well, and porting wasn't an issue. Now the thing you have to realize about porting arcade games at the time was that there was no real way to avoid a drop in quality. Take a look at most of the arcade games that got ported to the NES. Some of SNK's older games suffered particularly when being ported to the NES. Ikari Warriors, Athena, POW, and don't even get me started on the Atari 2600. I understand the 2600 is the very definition of classic, but if you tell me that it replicates the arcade experience, I'll just show you footage of any arcade port on the thing. I just need to bring up Pac-Man to perfectly explain my point. So if a console could recreate the arcade experience to the degree that the Neo Geo could, why didn't it flood homes? Well, it may have something to do with that Mondo price tag. The original launch bundle with 2 controllers and a game cost $650 US. Keep in mind, That's more than the PS3 at launch, not even taking inflation into account. When you adjust for inflation, that's $1,275. You could buy a gaming PC for less than that. Hell, even SNK themselves knew how much it would cost. That's why it was originally rented to places like hotels, bars, and game stores. They only released it to the general public when they realized that there were people willing to pay out the nose for the authentic arcade experience. Considering how some people would pay more for less, that's not too surprising, honestly. Of course, what good's a system without any games to go with it, right? Now, what genre do most people associate with the Neo Geo? Fighting games, right? Well, what if I told you that the first traditional fighting game for Neo Geo didn't launch until a year and a half into its lifespan? That game was Fatal Fury King of Fighters. None of the 4 games that Neo Geo launched with were even close to fighting games. They were a platform, a sports title, a shooter, and a mahjong game. The latter of which I'm pretty sure wasn't brought to America. We're going to take a look at 3 of these titles. The first of these is Magician Lord, which was developed and published by ADK. It's a jump-and-shoot platformer where you play as a young magician named Elta, who journeys across 8 lands to retrieve the 8 books that imprisoned a powerful warlock and his demon army. You can power up by claiming colored orbs in 3 colors. Pick up 2 in any combination, and you'll transform into one of 6 different forms. These forms have unique attacks and powers, but if you lose half your max HP, you'll return to normal. There are also power-ups which strengthen your shot, but a single hit drops your power-up, which honestly is kind of unfair. Every stage bar, the last one, ends with a fight with a mini-boss, whose difficulties range from easy to figure out to oh my god, someone get the crucifix now! The mini-boss is immediately followed by the boss. Defeat the boss, get the book, and credit it to your library card. The final stage is a boss rush, which is all the mini-bosses in a row. No! You get to pick one of your transformations for the final boss, but it turns out to be little help if you die, since you're back to normal when you respawn. The thing about dying here is that you typically respawn with little to no progress lost, which is the lone mercy in this game because the difficulty here is ruthless. And that's not for the right reasons either. First off, look at how big your sprite is. Your height is about 1/5 to 1/4 of the screen in height. And a bigger sprite means a bigger hitbox, meaning you're a bigger target for bigger damage from bigger enemies, making you wish you had a bigger health bar. This isn't helped by the way the game controls. From my recent experience playing through this game, your walk speed is slow and sluggish, and your jumping is floating and clunky. Not only does it take getting used to, but it makes it harder to dodge enemy projectiles, resulting in unhealthy levels of that. And get used to seeing that warlock's face. Not only do you see it on your best friend, the continue screen, but he'll show up before every boss fight with the standard SNK English, complete with cheesy voice acting. Another reason for this game's brutal difficulty is the level design and enemy placement. Some levels are so maze-like you'll swear that the coins you paid for each continue were the cost of admission to this funhouse. And some levels are filled to standing room capacity with enemies. And your base form only takes 2 or 3 hits before you explode into little sparkly things. Stage 5 in particular was full of frogs that mutated into frogmen, and so many mutated that I couldn't get turned around fast enough to avoid getting the Expelloramus kicked out of me. And don't get me started on Stage 7 and the bridge of moving platforms and evil eyeballs. The combination of knockback and the sheer number of enemies gunning for me resulted in enough lost lives and continues to the point where I should have just closed Fightcade were it not for the fact that I was doing research. I get what they were going for, but god, this game was a rough start. It was a technological achievement to be sure, but as a game, they had a lot of rough spots to work out. The second game going under the microscope is Nam 1975, a shooting gallery game where you control a soldier who's been deployed to the Middle East. No, that's definitely Vietnam. The first thing you notice about the game is that it has fully voiced cutscenes, and yes, the voice acting is incredibly cheesy. Also, this is one of, if not the only game for the system not to include the iconic startup screen. While we're here, I may as well bring up a couple common features of most Neo Geo games. First of all, when you insert a coin, there's a timer on the press start prompt that goes back to the standard attract mode when it runs out. The second is that there's typically a how to play before you actually begin the game. Both of these settings can be toggled via dip switch. Now the latter can be especially important for games like this, because of how this game controls. So your soldier has been deployed back to Nam because a prominent scientist and his daughter have been captured, and you have to rescue them. Like I said, that how to play comes in handy because you're in charge of both your soldier at the bottom of the screen and the aiming reticle for your gun. You have buttons for your standard weapon and a special weapon, usually grenades. The C button is for moving your soldier. You can move left and right, and by holding down left or down right, you can use an emergency and you'll be using it quite often because depending on the difficulty, you'll have plenty of enemies shooting at you. Thankfully, you'll have opportunities to collect power-ups, including special weapons. There are also a couple of opportunities to rescue hostages, and if you do, they'll help you out until you lose a life. All of that will help. A lot. That's because, like Magician Lord, this game is difficult. Unlike Magician Lord, however, this is mainly because of all the enemies you have to deal with. You've got all manner of enemy soldiers, from standard grunts, grunts with armor, troops with special weapons, not to mention tanks, choppers, fighter jets, etc. And they sometimes can hide behind cover, which you can conveniently destroy. There's even an entire stage where you take on a gigantic plane equipped with a small arsenal of armaments and enough troops to fill an entire barracks. But while the game itself is simply really tough, there's one particular point that trips the bullcrap circuit breakers. Unfortunately, that's the endgame. As it turns out, the scientist you've been trying to rescue is actually the bad guy, and when you see him, it should be obvious. I mean, he's basically Eggman's dad. First you deal with him in his armed wheelchair, then you take down a couple of women with machine guns. Once that's done, you're confronted with a massive mech that absolutely swamps you with lasers and cannonballs. And here's where the problem lies. Normally you can continue as long as you have coins to piss into the slot. But once you get to the final boss, if you're playing solo, the other player's indicator turns to game over. That means you have only 1 credit to learn the enemy mech's patterns and defeat it, or all the effort of shooting enemy soldiers and dodging enemy fire is rewarded with a bad ending.
That is bullshit lazy, still my heart is lazy. If the word kill me, I don't need a new word order.
As for the game's presentation, it is mostly solid. The sprites look great for what it's worth, and the music and sound effects are on point. The only knock I have is that the backgrounds look a little drab. Well, that's NAM 1975, a mostly solid game, but a hard as steel son of a bitch, and having 1 shot at the final boss is unforgivable. That kind of crap is saved for special bosses. Hello, Omega Rugal from KOF 2002, I did not miss you in the slightest. Now let's get on with the final act of this triple play, Baseball Stars Professional. Yup, it's a sports title, and as I've brought up before, I suck at sports titles. Hell, that's why I covered a beat-em-up about baseball playing ninjas last year instead of an actual baseball game. Nevertheless, I figured I'd take a look at this one in order to properly complete the retrospective. It's a standard baseball game with a quirky selection of teams to choose from. You have a choice of single game or tournament, you pick your teams, you pick your ballpark, and you take turns trying to swat balls with giant logs. In terms of presentation, the game looks good for its time. The sprites of the different players look nice, and the stadium graphics are well put together. The music isn't half bad either. However, there are some problems in the lineup where it really counts. The gameplay. B button advances runners, C bunts, and D calls a timeout so you can change a pitcher or fielder, but most of what you do is accomplished with the A button. Hitting, pitching, throwing the ball, all A button. It should be simple, but it really didn't feel simple to me. And from my time playing the game, hitting, pitching, and fielding each had their own set of issues, and each one felt like luck was involved in some way. With hitting, yeah, you need to swing with the right timing, but when I did make contact, I was never sure if it would go past the foul line, between the fielders, over the fence, or straight into the waiting hands of the AI outfielder. Also, the batter didn't always bring the bat back after attempting a swing. The bat would sometimes just hang there. I think you had to hold the button to make the batter follow through. Why would you do that? Real ball players don't just leave themselves in an awkward half swing. Pitching? I didn't really feel the kind of nuance that would be needed for pitching. But the worst, honestly, was fielding. Yeah, it took getting used to indicating where to throw the ball, but I did get used to it. The real problem was getting to the ball in the first place. By the time I knew if my fielders were near a fly ball where it was going to drop, the ball was just about to kiss the grass anyway. Maybe I just suck at baseball video games, but I should know where my guys are. One last weird thing. You're on a per credit timer. Once that runs out, you have to insert another coin to keep going. I think I know why they did that. Yeah, the Neo Geo's lineup was a bit of a rough start, but a rough start isn't necessarily a death blow to a system. Hell, some systems that stumble it out of the gate ultimately found enough legs to run a marathon. And over the years, the Neo Geo played host to some amazing and influential games. Fighting game icons like Fatal Fury, Samurai Showdown, and the King of Fighters, popular run-and guns like the Metal Slug series, shmups like Alpha Mission and Twinkle Star Sprites, updates of classic games like Bomberman and Mr. Do, puzzle classics like Bust-A-Move and Magical Drop, and cult classics like Windjammers, all found homes on this long-running platform, earning SNK its reputation as one of the kings of the arcade. And their legacy continues to this day. The King of Fighters is still going strong with the next game in the development pipe, Samurai Showdown got revived with one of the best games in the series, and a new Metal Slug game is in the works as well, with a formal announcement coming any day now. It's amazing how far the right idea can take you, even if the road to getting there can be a little bumpy at times.
Before I go, special thanks to the Garcade in Menominee Falls, Wisconsin. They were willing to show me the guts of the MVS cabinet so I could show it to all of you. If you're in the southeast Wisconsin area, feel free to check it out once this pandemic is over. Or at the very least, bring a mask. I'm the Quarter Guy, and until next time, the arcade is closed.
When someone wakes you up from a 100-year sleep and you don't have any memories, yeah, you're probably gonna be a little bit cranky. But when your world is nothing like you would have remembered it, your government is run by a copy of your old friend who's scrapping your own kind indiscriminately, and you're the only hope for the resistance, well, you can only hope 100 years is enough time to rest. Hey, nobody said the life of a freedom fighter was easy. Next time, Top 10 Mega Man Zero bosses. It's game time!